There we go.
All right.
Hey, good to see you, Amanda. Really surprised to see you here tonight. Are you a fan of someone? Jay, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Mike.
Toriano. We're in live on audio. We'll kick off the stream here in a couple of minutes. We have, unfortunately, had a couple of people on our guest panel that haven't been able to make it. Had one, Don at Tails Tavern, had a work emergency. So I'll wonder, hopefully he's doing all right, and he won't be on tonight. But we've got a good crew here, and it should be a lively discussion. It's going to be, I think, an interesting conversation because the perspectives here are very different. And obviously, as we get into this, well, I'll just wait because I don't want to tease too much. Robert, how was your day today?
Busy. It was busy, but it was good. Yeah. Happy Wednesday. It's over. We're getting closer to the weekend, so it's all good.
No offense, but you look like you've had a hard day.
Yeah. There's been a lot of those.
Yeah. Hello, Jerry. It was definitely had a Don with Tails Tavern. He had a work emergency that was apparently pretty epic. He notified me as early as like 10:30 today that it was going to be an all-day thing, and he tried really hard to be with us here tonight, but it just didn't work out.
Thankfully, that did not happen to me, because when that happens, that means bad things. Bad things.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Oh.
Hello, Tracy. Good to see you in. I think it will be a two-parter, Amanda. I really do. I think that this could be, there are going to be a lot that we're going to agree on. There's going to probably be some things that I'm going to be arguing with my panelists about tonight. And then so I'll get another one together where I can get some more people in that would all agree with me. So.
Yeah, but John, you're always right.
Thank you. See, we're off on a good foot. Yeah.
Do not feed his ego.
Robert, are you casting aspersions and suggesting that I have one which is already overfed?
Oh no, I'm stating it flatly.
Robert, didn't you know the Colossus of Rhodes was modeled after John?
Yes, the lawful evil anti-paladin, Jay. We will be having part 2 of that as well. Maybe we'll pull you in and join that. Be good to have some other sane, like-minded people in that dialogue.
You're right. Like-minded people. I would love to have Jay come on so he can join my side.
Oh, he will not.
You realize he is on my side of this argument.
No, he's not. No, he's just been telling you that. No, he just shines you on. Yeah, he tries to make you feel better.
Technically, by earlier editions, since paladins were lawful good, their direct opposite would be chaotic evil.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's if you go by direct opposite alignment. But we had a whole we had a whole stream on this. I don't want to go into it tonight, but I think it is clearly.
It is
the essence of the anti-paladin is not being a class or alignment, rather utter opposite. It is opposite to the core of the being, and just like you get into the difference between devils and demons and chaotic evil versus lawful evil. The worst thing, the most antithetical thing to a paladin is another individual of equally rigid thinking in terms of structure, but designed toward pure evil. That is actually the effective implementation of an anti-paladin. But
that's a fantastic story, and I'm glad you're going with it because it's so wrong. But on to Faith and Fantasy.
No, see, Jay's definitely agreeing with me. See? All right, here we go. Let's go live on 3, 2. Well, actually, we're a little bit early. We'll give it one more minute. People can't take too much LMA tonight, especially on this topic. Okay, now.
Oh, that'll be great.
Hey, Michael, were you talking about when this came out? I don't know.
Yeah, that's showing up well. Yes, of course.
Then there's also, was it Dragon 37, 39?
All right, here we go. 3, 2, and 1. And welcome to Blue Box. Little different kind of show tonight, different crew. I'm joined, of course, as always, by Robert. And then we have with us Mike on the upper, well, as you see him on the middle of the three screens. Mike, you know him as Necromantic DM. And you also know him as Beowulf316, I believe, in our Twitch. And he is also, of course, the husband of Manda, Mystical Unicorn. Mike, thank you for being with us tonight.
No problem.
And then you also see we have with us Jeff. You would know him as Moose. I believe it's 2271, if I'm remembering the number. And Moose is joining us, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
You bet, absolutely. We're missing a couple folks that were going to join. I was hoping to have C. Carson on tonight. He's unfortunately tied up. Actually, his wife's got a Bible study, so he couldn't make it tonight. And then I mentioned earlier Don from Tales Tavern. You would know him as Mad Wizard in our Twitch. He had a huge work emergency today. He was kind of keeping me updated on it all day long. And he couldn't join us for tonight's session. So hopefully we'll probably do a part 2 to this and take some other angles on it. But the subject tonight is faith and fantasy. Now, before we jump into that, let's just cover a couple of announcements. We thank you again to everyone that was with us last night for a fantastic stream. All the support that came from the community, all the bits, all the cheers, the subs. It was a great night. And all our players were extremely appreciative of all that support, as was I. Then on Sunday, we have our Tears of Aird stream. That'll be the second one. It's actually session 1, because the first one we did was a session 0. And that will be kicking off at 1:30 on Sunday. And then I will be on Jay's Gabbin show Sunday night as a prelude to the upcoming virtual Greyhawk Con, which starts on September 30th, goes through October 2nd. So that's just a little bit away. Robert also has a stream. I have a couple streams during that weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if you haven't registered, I believe, Jay, there are still some spots open for virtual Greyhawk Con. So if you want to sign up for some games, there should still be some games available for you there. So that's kind of some of the stuff we have going on. We may talk about sponsors when we get toward the end if we have some time, but I want to jump right into the topic. Okay, so faith and fantasy. We will, of course, touch on what has been monikered the Satanic Panic of the 80s and some of its origins and some of the evolution of it. But I want this topic to be much broader. I do want to talk about the role in faith and fantasy. I think you three are going to agree with me on a lot, but I think there may be some things that I have as far as thoughts or opinions that you may be surprised at or we may disagree on, and that's okay. I would just ask, as we have the discussion tonight, it can be a little bit more of a touchy subject. Anytime you're talking about faith, of course, that can be an issue. And I want to make sure that we are respectful of both those who maybe come from a strong faith background and also those who feel like if there's over moralization in your gaming, it's contrary, or sometimes you get to certain things that, like we could see in the Chick track, are laughable, right? So I think that's something that as we go through tonight, we want to have an open dialogue and look at some of the history of it, hopefully have a little bit of fun, maybe a little bit of a friendly controversy between us, and a good time for all the fans. So I'm going to start out tonight with you, Michael. You sent me an article which I thought was pretty neat. Let me pull it up here. It's this one from... it was the Back to the Future All Society Essays, the Dungeons and Dragons Panic of the 1980s. Pretty lengthy piece. And I like the mazes and monster part, and I've got a couple things I wanted to call out. But Michael, why don't we start with you? What would you like to sort of point out in this article?
Well, a lot of this started and came about because it's pre-internet, when you first started getting networks talking to each other and able to communicate newsreels with each other easier. Because prior to that, all your news stations are local.
Okay.
So when you're only getting local news, a lot of stories where, in one case they had a disappearance where someone disappeared or a suicide or something like that, they don't really make national news. Unless, now on a slow news day, they can.
Right. So obviously that would be a good place to start. That's the Egbert. Dallas, I believe, was the name he went by, Egbert. That was one of the original issues that came up. I think most people are familiar with that. Young college student, sophomore, I think, at 16 in college. By all accounts, quite bright.
Graduated and enrolled in Michigan State University at 14.
Yes, exactly. What was Amanda's? Are you drawing my attention? She said, "Am I missing something, Amanda?" I see at Blue Box. Want to make sure she didn't. Okay, I don't see anything. So yes, it's that's kind of where it started. And Robert, you know the story. Kind of what was the key piece of that story and how it unfolded?
Actually, that one particular one I'm not familiar with.
Oh,
I know about the story with the one that is heavily credited with the person going missing, but the one about as far as the one in college, no, that one I had not heard about.
Okay, well, so it's lower the music and raise the mic. Mike's mic. I can't really raise Mike's mic, so Mike can raise Mike's mic, or he can just speak up a little bit, but I can't control individual mics on Zoom. But what I will do is this. Let me go make sure my local volume is up. It is. And then, man, I've got the music really low on my side, but if it is too loud on that end, I will lower it yet further.
It was pretty loud earlier.
Well, some of the tracks do crescendo a bit, but I mean, that's as low as I have ever had it. So let us know how it sounds to everybody. Might have an anomaly on someone's system, but that music is literally as low as it gets. Let me check one other thing here. It's okay now. There is one track that gets a little bit loud, and I guess, Mike, maybe just make sure you speak up a bit more if you could.
Okay. All right, it's the same person.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same person. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay. All right. I mean, I remember there being the ties to him, him playing D&D and he had gone missing, and it had to do with them believing that he had gone off and killed himself in a tunnel, and turned out that he had just gone looking for his father or something. But they made a lot of hay about it, and
my understanding about this from another article as well was most of this wasn't the police. It was the private investigator they hired for some reason. Came up with involving the Dungeons and Dragons about it.
Yeah, that was the interesting part of that for me. So William Deere, he came in and he performed a private investigation. He's the one that found the pins on the corkboard that looked like they represented the steam tunnels that were underneath the university. They drew conclusions based on the fact that he had D&D books on his shelves, that he must have, gone down there to perform some sort of rite or what. I don't know exactly what the thought was, but they went down there and they found nothing. And then, William Deere went on to write a book on the topic, and those who are detractors of him have suggested he used this as an opportunity to sensationalize something for, profit purposes. Now, I don't know the man from Adam's House Cat, so I'm not making those allegations, but that was a really interesting element to the story. Jeff, are you familiar with this? Do you have any?
Yeah, it happened about 7 miles from where I live.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I live just south of Michigan State.
Okay.
My life. But yeah, he enrolled Michigan State. I believe it was in mechanical engineering at that age. But he had played Dungeons and Dragons with some friends, and they played in the old steam tunnels from the late 1800s.
Ah.
They were really gated off and not used, and they would go out and play in there. And then he disappeared. Well, the police thought, maybe something happened to him. So they looked for like 2 weeks, went way back in the old tunnels where some of them had collapsed and stuff, and couldn't find him. And then I want to say it was 6 weeks later, but some people said, I think it may have been a month. They actually found him. The investigator found him in Louisiana. And then but you're right about the pins on the board.
Mm-hmm.
The investigator, as I recall in the New York Times article about it,
Mm-hmm.
there was a TV interview here, reporters and stuff, and he, the last thing he said is, well, he played Dungeons and Dragons too. Well, then everything blew up about Dungeons and Dragons being related to it, and they were playing a live game, and on and on and on. And Mike's right about the network, because you had the AP Newswire back then. You had teletypes in the press rooms and stuff.
Right.
Once that hit, the Lansing State Journal was part of that, and they put it on the Newswire. So the New York Times ran it, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, all across the country. Kind of like the internet today.
No, exactly. And so super cool. Actually, I had no idea, Jeff, you lived that close or had, that extra detail. It makes me look really smart for having you on tonight. But I can't claim any credit for that. So this is obviously the piece that's talked about a lot. We won't watch the whole thing, but I think maybe just the first, minute or so are interesting for those that haven't seen it.
Indeed. It's become popular with children anywhere from grammar school on up. Not so with a lot of adults who think it's been connected to a number of suicides and murders. The idea of the game, which is played by highly imaginative and intelligent kids, is to assume the role of one of the characters. One game can go on for weeks or even months. The problem seems to be that some kids take it more seriously than others, take it a step further, playing a character who brings them the power in a game they couldn't possibly get in real life.
About 2 months ago, a green eyeball was seen up in the sky. This eyeball was so big it blotted out the sun, okay?
These young people are playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's an enormously complicated game in which each player chooses an imaginary character.
So I'm going to let that video play, and I'm going to silence the audio for a second. A couple things that jump out there to me. One, note the description for how they indicated the game, who was playing the game. I believe they said highly intelligent young people, or highly intelligent kids. So both an assumption of intelligence, which is interesting. Maybe, there is some, commonality there with creative pursuits, but I'm not making any assertions there. I just get, I guess, what they're trying to say. But then the other piece I thought was very interesting is, kids. And this game was never really targeted at kids. It was developed by adults. It came from chainmail, and yet it did certainly catch on with the younger generation. Comments on that?
My first DM was actually served in the Vietnam War. So,
wow.
And he played from chainmail.
I bet he had some very realistic combat.
Yeah.
Well, my first, I couldn't speak to that because my first DM was my cousin, who was a year and a half older than me, and would still be considered would still be younger than a lot of people are comfortable starting someone on D&D today. So, not necessarily TTRPGs, but a lot of them would start them with a different game.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, like what did Manda post in the Discord? Inspir something or others? The game for
Inspiralis.
So, yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
And there are a number of those out there. I do want to talk about that tonight as well.
I've played a whole bunch of them lately.
Yeah, I bet you have. Yeah. So talk to me then about coming back to this Egbert and Wheel thing. They found him. He was okay, but it is interesting to note that I believe some years later he did commit suicide.
1980.
It was a year later.
A year later, yeah. So
he ended up in Texas, living with his uncle, and what he had told the investigator was that he left because he was gay.
Interesting.
That's why he left.
Interesting.
Down there, but there was no evidence of that ever found.
Yeah, and I think this is where we do, as I mentioned earlier, we get into some of these. They're very delicate subjects. You know, I think most of us would likely agree that this young man had whatever emotional things that he was facing that were not caused by the game, and yet whatever those things may be, that's still a heartbreak to his family. Obviously, you never want to make light of people who go through difficult situations or families who have losses. And while, again, there are some comical elements to how this was portrayed, there's nothing comical about that. And so that was one of the early ones. And then I believe it was mentioned in the chat by Pat. Go ahead, Rob.
There is another part to that whole thing, though.
Oh, okay.
There was a book written that was based on the events. I don't know how true to the events it was as they unfolded, but they eventually ended up in a movie starring Tom Hanks, who plays a character who becomes emotionally unhinged by playing D&D.
Yeah. Now, isn't that the
Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah, right up here. I've got that. Mazes and Monsters. That was 81, 82. Now, what I thought was fascinating about some of that discussion, and you'll see it here in this article, you know, you have many. Is this the one? Or no, it's in the next one. But yeah, linking to murder suicides. It was kind of really based off of the 60 Minutes piece that was done. So. What came of that? I don't know if I've ever watched that movie, Rob. Have you? And what came of that for you?
I have not. To be honest with you, it's one of those movies that even back then I would have kind of just why, you know, because I couldn't because I couldn't relate. I wouldn't have understood what they were trying to prove. You know, I played the game. I was young when I played the game, and it just wouldn't have made much sense. I wouldn't have found it to be realistic, honestly.
Right. Okay. What about you, Mike? Did you watch it?
Actually, no, I didn't. Actually, I might have once and was like, this makes no sense.
Go ahead. Joe?
They had an episode of NCIS as well that was something similar with an MMO.
Yeah, and that's a topic I want to discuss as well tonight. You know, you've got, video games and other influences. And we're going to come back to some of these stories and the satanic panic stuff. But let's talk about that larger issue of the influence of message and or media on people, but especially on young people. Now, you've always had the, rock and roll is the devil's music, or, it's bad to go to movie theaters, or, all kinds of things which go to a sort of more of an extreme. Do video games cause violence? Do they breed violence in young people? I've got some thoughts there, but Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember back then, what was it? The Satanic Bible was written in 1969, I believe.
Anton LaVey.
That kind of got a lot of airtime stuff, and then you had movies like The Car and The Poltergeist and the other ones in the 70s, all about the cult and Satan.
Amityville Horror.
Amityville Horror.
The Exorcist.
The Exorcist, yeah.
It was all in the mindset of the country. I mean, pretty much everybody saw those movies and stuff. There was also, as I recall, there started to become mostly in the 80s court cases. And there was a famous one later in the 80s, but about kids being used in rituals and stuff, even though nothing was ever found, nobody was ever convicted or even charged with a crime.
Yeah.
That spread around quite a bit. I know when they were looking for, when the Dungeons and Dragons comment was made, actually the hobby store I used to go to, there was people out front protesting. They had signs walking around. They didn't want people to go in. Well, I just told them I needed some stuff for my train set. So
my Lionel needs some more of the smoke, liquid to put in the top, right? What about? Sorry, go ahead.
It was a plaza, so the people got, they were there a couple days and they left. The police escorted them away and stuff. But
yeah, what about you, Mike? Do you see any link at all between the media that's consumed or engaged in, either by type or by amount, that has an effect potentially on especially young people?
Not really that I've seen. I mean, I sent you Gary's quote dealing with all this, which makes a really good point. And it's kind of, how I look at it.
If you don't mind, I know the quote you're referencing. Would you save that? I think there's a point at which that would I want you to give that quote, and it would make more sense in context. Would you mind that? Could I have you just save that?
Yep, I'll save that.
Okay.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
You see stuff like that all the time. It's and even now none of this has stopped. I mean, when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie came out,
that blew me away. I did not know that.
There's like someone counted there's 1,400 and something. If you watch Hot Shots Part 2, the second Hot Shots movie, they actually make fun of it in there because they've got a scene where Charlie Sheen's firing an M60 and he's just shooting people, and they start a violence counter at the bottom. And it goes, bloodier than this movie, bloodier than this movie, bloodier than this movie. And it keeps going, and it mentions Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, bloodier than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's just standing there. There's no ammo going into this gun. He's waist deep in a pile of brass shell
cases.
Making fun of the whole thing.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that there were some sightings that there had been as many as like 1,000 injuries in the real world based on people, liking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is probably, 975 9 or 10-year-old boys that are smacking each other with sticks because they're trying to do Ninja Turtles.
I mean, listen.
WWF or WWE now.
Oh
yeah, certainly, right.
Between that and when the various ninja movies started hitting, Shokasugi, and just brought a wave of movie. Yeah, no, we were out in the woods beating each other with sticks. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, how many kids jumped off of roofs because they wanted to be a ninja? I think I did that.
No, we had a little more. Well, okay, we looked at the roof and we knew our limits there. However, we had one of the kids that I went to school with. He lived in an area where there was a small wooded area in his near his backyard, which where I live is not that common. So we'd go into the wooded area. We'd take like broomsticks or whatever we could find, and basically call them weapons. And there was a log that went over a small creek, and we would battle on the log and try to knock each other off. And somehow we didn't break any bones, which is a miracle. But yeah, no, this was fun.
Exactly. So, but coming back to the question, we're going to move on. We're going to jump around a bit here because I want to hit on some more serious topics, and then I want to hit on some lighter topics. And this one, thank you, Mike. You talked about that beforehand, and I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle story. That's fun. So, back to my question. I'll give you my sort of supposition on it. And people in the chat, you guys can pop in there and let us know what you think. And any of you, I'd like to see if you actually can. If you disagree with what I'm going to say, I'll be surprised, but I'd like to know why. So, I think we're going to speak in generic terms. You can never know what one individual person is going through, what's in their mind, what they're already prone to do, what they're struggling with. But in general, especially if you take young kids, impressionable, and I don't know what age we want to talk about there. Is that 6? Is that 7? Is that 10? Is it 12? But, kids in that, still sort of formative age range. If they sit down and play Call of Duty, are they going to go out and, try to find an AK and shoot somebody? No. Are they even going to be more likely to punch their friend on the playground? No, I don't think there's any evidence for that. So I do think there is an over-centralization, you know what I'm trying to say. And that can happen even from watching, okay, if they watch Rambo, or, if they watch a movie that's got some violence in it, are they more prone to do that? I don't think so. But I would suggest that there is such a thing as a connection between diet and content of media and volume, both the type and the volume of it. So if you take a 9-year-old kid and you pump 12 hours a day of graphic violence into their eyes, either through, games or movies, horror films, and you do that day after day after day, I would call that child abuse, first of all. But if you did it, I think you would be hard-pressed to suggest to me you don't think that would have any psychological or mental impact on that child.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
Good.
Desensitize them to violence.
Yeah, or induce depression. We are empathic social beings. And so I think it's a function of type and volume of content. If I see a Mortal Kombat character, digitized animation, fatality, and I play, a few times a day, I don't think that's got an effect. But if I am seeing truly graphic images, horrible, chainsaws slicing, through people and gore and bodies and screaming and hours of that content, I'm using hyperbole here to make a point. There's a continuum of that scale. To suggest that exposure to something like that has an extreme effect, I disagree. To express a view that extreme influence of that has no effect, I also disagree. Rob?
So, I mean, I agree, but maybe not for the reason you think. I think if you consume too many hours of anything, it's going to have some kind of negative effect. I mean, granted, how that effect takes place and how it represents may be different. But
if I watch 12 hours of Gilligan, what effect is that going to have on me?
You're going to marry Mary Ann.
Listen, if you're a young male watching 12 hours of Gilligan, I'm going to start questioning what your interest in Gilligan's Isle is. I mean,
that was just the first thing that came to mind. Probably the wrong example.
Point that out. Yeah. I mean, I remember watching Gilligan's Isle plenty when I was a child.
All right, move on. That's a bad example. All right, so no, I get your point though. Is yes, excess consumption of any but I think again, and I'm looking. If there's anything in the chat, maybe if it's pulled out here, you guys can let me know if I'm missing something. But yeah, if you see, or I remember growing up as a young teen, The Faces of Death came out I don't know if you guys ever saw that. And for those that don't know, The Faces of Death was you could get it at your local VCR store, and you could pick up that VHS tape and bring it home, and it was a string of videos showing people actually dying, like videoed deaths of people consumed for entertainment purposes.
Usually
including an execution. Yeah. Electric chair execution.
I forgot it. Yeah.
That was the one that was like the hook that people used to use. You got to see this.
Steve is, I think, advocating for Faces of Death 1 through 100. So look, I am not casting aspersions at anyone if you like to watch horror movies or like if you like consuming kinds of content. We're really just talking here about, is it possible for media and content, especially in a younger mind, to have some influence, and I would suggest it does. That would at least be my take.
I can give you, there's also the matter of, on some level of addiction to it, because I can just speak to going to college. When I was at school, I went to one of the first fully networked campuses, and multi-user dungeons, text dungeons were a big thing on campus, and there were people that I knew that started playing these games, and whether it was the parasocial aspect of it, because dealing with people face to face was a lot harder than dealing with people in a game, they failed themselves out because they literally played this game for days on end. I know at least two people who did nothing but play the game, missed classes for a week straight because they never left their room.
I agree completely. And I think I've read things about, teenage kids who died in their gaming chair with having consumed nothing but, Doritos and Mountain Dew and then not eaten for 4 days and like collapse and die. I mean, those are certainly extreme cases. Coming back to not the volume, but the content. And that's an interesting thing too. I want to talk about what she said. Dr. Joyce Brothers. I thought she actually had a pretty good point. When you've watched any movie, any film, any documentary, have any of you ever watched something that just actually truly disturbed you? Like you thought, that's probably not something I should be watching? While you're thinking, I'll give. Go ahead.
See Faces of Death, which kind of was like, why am I watching this?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, I watched that. It was almost on a dare. Can you get through this?
Yeah. Yeah. Chris said Misery. I don't think I've ever seen Misery. Yeah. I mean that I think is
Hellraiser. Was the first time I saw a Hellraiser movie. I was probably a little too young to be watching that.
Yes.
Because it took a while for that kind of thing. It's like, all right, yeah, that's hard to watch.
Yeah, I could see that. Pat said aliens in the chest bursting scene. Sorry if that was a spoiler for anybody. Welcome back to the 1980s. But that was like, I loved that as a kid. I thought that was like one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. Let's see. Weren't scared, but that's why you're watching this. I'll give you another one. So Faces of Death, that's a pretty obvious one. I do think there's something exceptionally macabre about watching live video of people dying for entertainment purposes. But another one, and maybe this was just me, my wife and I, we're not big, we don't really watch horror movies. We'll watch some scary movies occasionally. But, like I've not seen the Halloweens or, things like that. I think it would be maybe the closest thing to that we've watched. But The Ring, the one time I watched The Ring, I actually turned that movie off. I felt like oppressed. I think I broke the DVD and I threw it in the trash can. And I was like, no, there was something about that just didn't agree with my spirit. What about you, Michael, Joe, anything?
I've never been a big fan of the Gorefest movies, the Friday the 13th
right
movie. Freddy Krueger. There's not.
None of the 17 of them.
I don't find them scary. It's just how many screwed up ways can we come up to kill people and throw blood all over the place?
Right.
And that's not scary.
Right.
Stuff like the first Alien movie, which was actually a horror movie. Up until you saw the full alien, the guy in the rubber suit at the end, that was a scary because you never knew where it was or where it was going to come from. And the psychological build-up for that makes it a good horror movie. Whereas, some guy going around swinging a machete, chopping people up, shooting blood all over the place, go away, that's not horror.
Yeah, no, that's so...
I mean, I'll be the first to admit that the Halloween movie... The thing that got me in a Halloween movie even more ever than Michael Myers ever did was that piano. Because piano started going and it was like, okay, all right, something's going to happen. Oh, wait, all right. It stopped.
Yeah, exactly. And so that is, I think you guys are both hitting on a really good point. It is sort of part of the experience of all forms of media or storytelling. That's a really bad place for me to pause on that guy. I'm sorry, buddy. Let me give you a better look there. Actually, I'm not sure there's a good one I can find. All right, that's a good one. So you have these gratuitous scenes of violence which become repetitive and predictable, and you lose the imagination. And the imagination is really where the power of things like fear reside. So even to Robert's point, when that music is that piano, that key is playing, the anticipation in Robert's mind, there are already things being conjured which incite fear. Or I believe it's Stephen King that has written, the door is more important than what's behind the door. Meaning this idea of when you actually show the whatever it is, the monster, it's generally going to be a disappointing thing, but the anticipation of that person walking up to the door and the strange lights that come through the side and the creak of the handle, and that builds this in you, and that is the real power of the imagination versus I think what you guys are saying is, yeah, you're not really big into the the stuff that's get quite gory because eventually it just gets boring. All right, so coming back to tonight's topic, I want to go back to the article that Mike sent over, and so we have the 60-minute special. In this, it was interesting to note you had a lot of assertion that the game was connected specifically to teen suicides. Some of the stats that were mentioned, I think during the 60 Minutes interview, they mentioned that there had been 12 kids in maybe it was in a year or a year and a half that had committed suicide that all had some connection to D&D. And this was being posited as evidence that there was correlation versus causality, right? If you're from the logical arguments, right? Okay, there's a correlation. Is that causality? And even the argument of correlation was pretty weak because I think what the guy who was the press guy for TSR, by the way, he was awful. He said a couple of things that were dumb as a box of rocks. But he said, there were 30,000, I think, teenage suicides that year. And it was growing quite prominently. And the fact that you would have any correlation among 12 that play a game is hardly a sense of causality. And I think this is where the feeling was there was a lot of unnecessary panic. Not that it's unnecessary to be concerned about your kids or concerned about content, but that there were leaps being made for the purpose of sensationalism. There we go. I got it that time. And also in some cases for profiteering based on books and media. Comments from any of you?
I mean, when that kind of tragedy happens, people go looking for answers, and they want a reason that it happened. And sometimes they want a reason that doesn't involve looking too closely, because they want something else to blame. They want there to be an external reason if they can find one.
Well,
because I mean, let's face it. Even now, you see suicides now that they're widely reported, especially celebrities. How many have there been? People you would think had like the entire world, but we still don't understand a lot. A lot now as far as why it happens. The lengths of depression and the impact that it has. Back then, I'm sure they didn't even have half of what we know now.
No,
is still far too little.
I think that's well said, and this kind of comes back, and we're gonna get really back to the core of the subject, and then I really want to conclude with the last 20 minutes of our show tonight, talking about some of these ideas of the role of faith and fantasy and how they play together, and some of the history behind those things. But back to this idea of the ability of media or games or content to influence behaviors. Let's take something more recent. How many of you are familiar with the show 13 Reasons Why? Netflix show a few years ago, and I don't think the producers of the show would want it to be characterized this way, and I must be honest, I never watched the show. I just saw some clips of it. But it essentially records the annals of a teenage girl who elected to commit suicide, and before doing so, and if I'm mischaracterizing this, someone pop me in the chat. I could be telling it wrong, but I think this is correct. She wrote 13 letters to different people in her life, explaining the reasons why she had decided to commit suicide. And I believe there were episodes that kind of went through each one and the impact on each person. Now, for some, the suggestion would be that this was a way to draw attention to the problem of teen suicide, maybe the way they cry out, looking for signs. I'm sure there was good that was intended by much of this, but there certainly was a sense of glorification, of justification of her decision, and the sense that she was living on through these communications. And yeah, you look at it, there was a spike in teen suicides in the year following and in the months following the airing of that show. So do you say those kids committed suicide because of 13 Reasons? Well, no. But is it possible that even possible that there was some influence to someone who was already teetering on the edge, and they saw something that had, a effect on them in terms of how they perceived it. I think it would be hard pressed to argue that. Comments?
I'll tell you, I don't feel actually qualified to answer that question because, again, it's hard to fathom.
We're a bunch of D&D geeks on Loremaster's Arcanum. You think any of us are qualified to talk about any of this?
But it's the kind of thing where it's like, I can't I don't understand, and what it would take for me to get to the point where considering taking my own life would be a thing. So I can't speak to what someone was going through or could, what those triggers would have been, because it's just something that I can't, I don't understand how that works. I can't figure what the connection was, how much there was, how much it might have been, was it just going to happen anyway, and it was just a matter of time, and it was the final thing. I don't know. I really can't say with any certainty at all.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't expect any of us to have certainty. We're just discussing opinions here. But go ahead, Michael.
My stepbrother committed suicide.
I'm so sorry.
This was actually a couple years ago. Amanda and I went to the funeral. I'd only met him once. My dad remarried. He committed suicide on his dad's birthday, who had passed away. This was probably a couple weeks after his girlfriend, who'd been ill for a long time, passed away. And he didn't live nearby. And during the funeral, they said he's the kind of guy that would give you the coat off his back and never expect it back. What popped into my head was, where were his friends? If a friend of mine's girlfriend passes away, and we're coming up on the anniversary when his dad passed away, he's not by himself at all for a while, because he's not in a good place.
Yeah, no, I think well said, and we're getting a little off topic, but my condolences, Michael. And I think you're right. Community is so critical for everyone. And I think that is actually some of the argument that people make for role-playing games. There is a sense of community that's often created, but if
you look in chat, look at Pat 66's last comment.
I think so. D&D kept. Yeah. Okay. So Pat said D&D kept him from taking his life. It got him into a group of people that he could talk to and socialize with instead of being alone and living in negative households. Yeah. So I think.
So.
Go ahead.
But here's where I run into a problem, and I mean, it's important to try to make sure that you're there for those people when those kind of terrible things are happening to them, and making sure that they're not alone. But the probably of all the suicides that have happened, the one to me the most shocking one was Robin Williams. I mean, here was a guy who everybody loved. I mean, is there I dare you to find somebody who didn't wasn't, if they watched Robin Williams, didn't like the guy. He had a brand new show that was a hit. He was he had been doing stand-up for years and years. One of the funniest people on the planet. Didn't stop him. It wasn't like he had gone off and become a hermit or something and no one had heard from him, and then he killed himself because the lights went out. He was back. I mean, he'd been suffering from depression. There's you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I'd like to pull the show back from the specific subjects of suicide. These are extremely difficult topics and not really where I wanted the content of the show to go. But I appreciate, Michael, first of all, I do appreciate you being open about that. And then, Rob, I take your point, and I think that's actually does come to the key underpinning here is every person's situation is different. Everything that someone goes through is different. We know that Robin Williams had both substance abuse issues, depression issues, and there's, I believe I'd read even recently that there were some things that were found in the autopsy that he had some things going on with his brain that were quite physical. So to that point, does socializing help him? No, he was a super social guy. But if you take Pat 66, who was feeling alone and isolated and got the socialization, they had different maladies addressing different things. The point I was really just trying to drive home here is, while we would, I think, all on this panel agree, and I pretty much everyone in chat agree that the satanic panic as named, or the blaming of a role-playing game for these significant ritual murders or other things is absolutely misplaced, and sometimes it is done so farcically. But I don't think that necessarily means that lets us divest ourselves of understanding the importance of how we interact with other people, especially as we're interacting with kids. So I want to kind of close with that thought in a second, but first, we could not do this without looking at the infamous Chick track. Let me find it here. Oh, it's in this document. So for those of you that aren't familiar, if you are Christian, as I am, it's hard to have been a Christian and not know Chick tracts. Chick tracts, if you don't know what these are, they're very small pamphlets, and they can be left anywhere. They were provided for free many times, or I think churches would pay like a really small fee for the publication or the actual print piece, and they would be given out free to people in church. And many of them candidly had good messages. As I said a moment ago, I am a Christian. I very much have a biblical worldview. This is something which was many times viewed in conflict, meaning to be a Christian and have that worldview, and then to also play Dungeons and Dragons was somehow seen as a conflict, which I have come to the conclusion, as have many of my friends and the people that we have here in the chat, that are also of both persuasions. They love role-playing games, they love D&D, but they also ascribe to a Christian perspective and worldview. But what was funny about this one is the way some of this was so here you have it starting, okay, wizard, cast your spell. Okay, dungeon master, my spell of light blinds the monster. I'm skipping some of the narrative given here. And of course, this was already mentioned by two people in the chat. No, poor Blackleaf. Blackleaf did not find the poison trap, and I declare her dead. Well, that's really bad DMing. That's the first thing. And we really this DM needs some help. And then the child says, no, I'm not Blackleaf. No, I'm going to die. Please don't make me quit the game. Please don't. Somebody save me. You can't make me do this. Marcy, get out of here. You're dead. You don't exist anymore. Okay. If you find yourself at that table, you need to leave. You need to leave that table immediately. That is not the way this game is to be played, nor how I've ever seen it. Those people are very disturbed. Then you have the grooming. Debbie, your cleric has been raised to 8th level. I think it's time you learn to really cast spells. You mean you're going to teach me how to have the real power? Yes, you have the personality for it. And of course, that goes then to they're in a cabal, pentagram circle, and she's given the name Elfstar, and she gets occult training, and then she finally learns how to cast her first spell, and it's the real power. This is something else that's interesting. Some of the claims that were in those articles weren't just that people were influenced in a negative way mentally. There was actually two parents who said they walked into a room and saw their son actually literally summon a demon in the room before he then killed himself. I think those are things which those go beyond the pale. When you're talking about a role-playing game, that makes no sense and is clearly not something that I would ascribe to. But which spell did you cast, Debbie? mind bondage on my father. He was going to try to stop me from playing D&D. So he bought me 200 books, $200 of books and figures and manuals. It was great. And then, now she's ignoring her friends later that week. She won't even take the phone calls from her friends, so she's clearly isolating. Her friend comes over. We haven't seen her, and, she hasn't been herself the last few weeks ever since her character got killed. It's as though a part of her died. Maybe you can talk some sense into her. Then she's actually levitating off the bed in this frame and sort of vibrating and, affected by this occult power. And then it's my fault Blackleaf died. I can't face life alone. Marcy, just...
Actually, John, that's where she hung herself and committed suicide because her character died.
Okay, well, now see, I was trying to give the PG-rated version of it. I guess I should have noted the chair that's falling off, but yeah, either way. Really, just a very strange way to approach this. And then, she goes through and she falls out with her mentor. Now, I'm not going to go further with this because I want to say again, with Chick Tracts, there was actually good content in some of them. And there is what we would refer to as a gospel message at the end. But it is to me so discredited by the approach to the rest of that content. And this is why there has been a level of mockery around the topic of the so-called satanic panic, because it was overreaching, sensationalizing, and asserting or assigning blame to something which clearly people knew nothing about, had never played. And when you look at the kind of media content and things that we consume as a society today, D&D is quite tame by comparison. Before I get to my final topic, comments from any of my panel?
Well,
I was going to say that the deal at Michigan State, the Archdiocese of Detroit actually got involved in that for a little while.
Oh, really?
And then he made, the people who were, it's D&D is Satanism and this and that, went to him. And he looked at the game and stuff and he said, it's a game people play. And then they said, well, you don't know anything.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and I was ultra involved. I mean, I was everywhere doing everything. I was, let's put it this way. It would have surprised nobody if I had become a priest. Seriously. To the point where when I got married, the priest who married us joked about the fact that he finally had to give up on having me become a priest. There was, the Chick Tract that I guess that was never a thing, and never something distributed.
Not really Catholic. It was more of like an independent or a fundamental Baptist type of thing. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had priests that I knew that were every bit as much into sci-fi and fantasy as I was. So, it was never broached at the church. It was never brought up in any of the youth group discussions, in any of the homilies, any of the Sunday, whatever you name it. Never a thing. If they took note of it, they decided to ignore it and basically probably treat it the same way they did in Detroit. It was for us. It was like a non-issue, and my parents for as Catholic as they were, was like, well, they're reading, they're staying busy, they're staying out of our hair, and they're not fighting with each other.
Yeah, that's a low threshold to overcome. Yeah, that's good.
This is good. We like this.
There's one other thing too. I first played in 1977 at the end with my cousins, and we just had the little books and stuff. I wasn't too into it, but the next school year, we played it in school.
Oh yeah,
as part of European history class. The teacher bought.
That's brilliant.
five Village of Hamlets, and we all broke up into groups, and then we played it as part of our schooling. But I'd heard once the kid went missing at MSU, then some parents raised an issue with it being played in school. Somebody had found out, and then so they cut it out. So the teacher didn't do it anymore. But
Interesting.
it worked really well for the school. You had.
Oh yeah, you engage kids in learning history. So we need to kind of start coming in for a landing here, and I want to make sure we address some things in the chat. We got a lot of comments, folks that came from primitive backgrounds, people that had their books burned. I know someone close to me that parents had read the book The Devil in the Toy Box, and all of her toys were thrown out. These are what we call the overreactions. But I do want to come back. If you look at Fraley 17. He said, I think what we have to remember is that as people, we can make normal things and turn them to be dangerous. As a believer, I know the boundaries. In my games, I like to stay away from demons and devils and such. My faith overrides any games I might play. I have no problem with that. I have no problem. There was a couple other points here. Yeah, we've got a lot of comments. It's clearly hitting on an important note. But I want to close on this one, and will probably be the segue to what will likely be a part 2. I think, in my view, there is an intrinsic responsibility for the overarching message of the game. And what I mean by that is, I think great fantasy, going back to some of the original, Tolkien, of course, being a progenitor, they usually contain these epic narratives of good versus evil. When you have an essentially evil structure to your game or your campaign, I do think that can easily degenerate into things which are probably not very productive, but especially not for children or people who can be easily influenced. So if you'll note at Blue Box in my games, you have evil. There is definitely evil, but evil is always the foe. Evil is always the enemy. There can be gray. There can be neutral. Of course there can be. I don't mind if you have a thieving league of merchants that are an important part of your game. But I do think the essence of how, at least this is just me speaking, I blend faith and fantasy, is that I make sure the stories that I'm telling are stories. Now the good guys could lose, that could be part of it, but they're stories which are bent toward the triumph of good over evil. And frankly, not only do I think that's consistent with my faith, I think they're the best stories. I think anything else kind of can go the direction that Mike talked about with the Halloween movies just becoming, gratuitous, watching a bunch of murder hobos going around and committing villainy on the citizens, or, that a reverse dungeon and you want to play the goblins for a night, that's cool. That's fun, right? But when you're telling these stories, I think it's important to keep in mind the goals of the story. To say that a Christian would not engage in fantasy would ignore a lot of the heritage of fantasy. And there are churches out there still today that don't think you should read Harry Potter, don't think you should read The Lord of the Rings, that those books themselves will have a negative influence on you, and maybe the realm of spiritual influence. I do want to talk about that on the next one. Is there even a possibility of things like spiritual influence or oppression? Very, very controversial topics, but I think a fun discussion. Point being, when you as a person of faith run a game, keeping that sort of as your North Star, I think doesn't just make it more consistent with your faith, it makes it a better game. And I think this is especially critical when you're playing with kids. I've introduced my kids to actual, the game D&D, though I highly simplify the rules, by age 5 and 6. And, they still play the game today. But we've always had that as a tenet of how the game is played. I'll let my guests have the last word before we close off. Let's start with you, Joe.
Oh, you mean Jeff?
I'm sorry, Jeff, yes.
Well, I wanted to come on because I knew quite a bit about the whole Michigan State and the young man deal, since I watched it literally happen in front of me. But there's, I think in general, most people are able to separate stuff and keep, it's a game and this and that. And faith does, it is a big part for a lot of people, and how they play the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody can have their different meters. What you can normally find is the people that have trouble distinguishing from reality, and those that are already kind of heading down a path of, let's call it cerebral instability, are those that think anti-paladins are chaotic evil. That is a sure sign that they are headed down a bad path. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, well, you talk about these things. It kind of brings up to why session zeros are a good thing. Make sure that everyone's on the same page with the content, what the expectations of the game are, where the lines are, and what people are comfortable with. Because I can tell you now, there might be things in my game in a long campaign that people, might be 99% on, but some of the stuff that we've discussed here, some people might not be comfortable with.
Well, no, and that's kind of why you're right, Rob. I'll let you finish, but you're right. I wanted to pull it back. We got a little deeper into a very, very delicate subject tonight than I intended, but I think it was done from a very good spirit. And if there's anybody in the chat that was offended by the discussion that kind of led into Mike talking about a family member who had committed suicide, please understand that was him sharing something very important to him, and I think it was really topical for us tonight. So hopefully you all felt like we handled that in the correct way. If not, send the discords to Robert. Go ahead, Robert. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, the discussion of demons and devils. I've used them in my game to great effect because, what in fantasy terms, what greater evil is there? It's pure evil.
Yeah.
There's no redemption. There's no redemption to be had there. And protecting the people from it. Well, that's there you go. That's the as a playing wanting to play a paladin or having paladins in my game. That's where there's your goal.
No, I think that's
rid the world of that kind of stuff.
That's really well said, Robert. First good thing you've said tonight. And
I had to get one. I mean, just one.
Well, we couldn't go in LMA without Robert and I teasing each other back and forth. It's a hallmark of the show. I also use
about being beaten down on anti-paladins.
I am like you. I will use those kinds of creatures in my game, and they are always viewed and used as the ultimate evil to be conquered. But I respect someone who has a different view on that. And likewise, if somebody wants to put an evil character in your game, you play the game you want to. I'm not trying to moralize to you on this. I am just speaking from my perspective on how I don't just balance fantasy and faith, but intertwine them. Take C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, perhaps the greatest Christian apologist to ever live, arguably, and wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and wrote the Screwtape Letters. Had great fantasy, great content. You had typology in those, which related back to Scripture, and yet embraced and actually helped move the fantasy genre forward. So I think it is. It's clear that faith and fantasy are not just something that can be balanced, but they are two things which can actually fantasy can tell great and inspiring stories, and that is what I always strive to do inside of my role play. Michael, any final thoughts?
Yep, you've got to remember D&D is touted as a heroic role-playing game. Players are supposed to be heroes. You learn math. Encouraged to read, teamwork, problem solving, all skills you need in the real world. So it's actually very educational. Another thing, and like you said, good guys are good, bad guys are bad, but you can also have redemption. Not everybody is a lost cause.
Yeah, redemption. Actually, if you play the Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous campaign, there is actually a demon, a woman who became a demon, and there's a possibility to redeem her in the campaign, and it's a very interesting piece of the game. But as we conclude tonight, I want to say thank you again to all. It was a very different discussion for us tonight. Got a lot heavier at times than LMAs typically do, which I sort of knew would happen. But I do think we have some seeds here to talk about sort of growing this where where can you bring your game with these ideas of faith and fantasy, looking back at where the game has come from to see, clearly no one today is ascribing, mass teen, or issues or, suicides or things like that to Dungeons and Dragons anymore. It was a really interesting sort of flash in our society. But I do think the ending message here is the game is to be fun. I love your comment, Michael. It is to tell heroic stories. That doesn't mean you can't have a grungy, chaotic, neutral dwarf that's grumpy and, contrary and, occasionally, you can have a thief that pickpockets or you can even, I'm not saying everything is squeaky clean or, darkest dark, but the overarching stories of the game should lend themselves to that sort of imaginative heroism. Ultimately, I think that's what started D&D, and that's what we sort of look for. So with that first edition, Assassins couldn't be good, actually. Yes, that's right. I know. The chat has been great tonight. Steve Bloodwild, I have not shouted you out enough tonight. You have been on fire in the chat. You have made me laugh several times. Yeah, Primitive Paint Shop, I love C.S. Lewis as well. To those that engage in the conversation with us in chat tonight, if there was anything that was upset tonight that that upset you or that you were uncomfortable with, please let us know. That was never our intent. We really just came in here to have a conversation as friends, talk about a game that we love and how it ties in with faith. And I think this is a topic which is sometimes quite complicated and sometimes oversimplified. There is a lot to discuss here. And so we're hoping we'll have this again with a slightly different format and some topics to grow from. But I want to say thank you to Michael. I want to say thank you to you, Jeff. Again, your stories being 7 miles from that whole process that happened at MSU, that's crazy. And you had some unique experiences. Thank you for sharing those with us. And then Robert, although all is in jest, as always, my friend, thank you so much. Robert, do you have anything you want to shout out in terms of your creative stuff? I know you got a VGHC game coming up here. I know you had a character building thing last night.
Yeah, so I guess the big thing is you had already mentioned Virtual Greyhawk Con coming September 30th through October 2nd. My Friday night game is full. As a matter of fact, there are quite a few Mad Chatters in that Friday night game. That is at 11 p.m. Eastern on Friday night. So if you are on the West Coast or West Coast adjacent, or you're just an insomniac like me, come watch us play. It's going to be fun. We're going to be playing White Plume Mountain.
Nice.
Classic first edition adventure. And the Sunday morning game, at last check, I still had 2 spots in it. I know that Toriano and 491 Phantom are playing in that game.
Outstanding.
And I still have 2 spots, 7 a.m. on Sunday morning. That one is going to be another CNC game. The Shadows of a Green Sky is a Troll Lord Games adventure that I am placing in the world of Greyhawk. And yes, I'm actually going to be playing in the Ever Mysterious Tim's game on 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. So
always fun. Always fun.
I will be all over Virtual Greyhawk Con. There's a good chance you're going to see me somewhere. Just find whatever game's going and just keep flipping through them. I'll be in one of them.
Yeah, and I've got the stream on Friday afternoon and evening, and I've got the stream on Saturday afternoon, and then I'll also be in the Joust on Saturday night, and that'll be fun. The first time I've joined the Joust, but great time will be had by all. Thank you again to all of our Mad Chatters. Thank you again to my guests. We're going to go ahead and get ready to raid into Jay. Anybody have any final comments or thoughts as we're setting up the raid? All right.
In case anybody forgot, I'm the guy that always gives advantage to John.
Thank you so much.
That's how you got on.
That's actually how he got on the show. Yeah, that's true.
The Michigan Connection